Leo Tolstoy said, "Anyone can become angry, that is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, this is not easy." Hello viewers. Welcome to Seek Wisdom. Emotions play a great role in our life. Rather, our success or failure depends on our skills of managing emotions. Today we are with the summary of a book related to this topic, Emotional Intelligence, written by Daniel Goleman. Published in 1995, this book shows that emotional intelligence may be the best predictor of success in life, redefining what it means to be smart. It redefines the word intelligence. This book is in 5 parts. Let's start with the first part. The emotional brain. Our deepest feelings, our passions and longings, are essential guides, and that our species owes much of its existence to their power in human affairs. Our emotions guide us in facing predicaments and tasks too important to leave to intellect alone. Each emotion offers a distinctive readiness to act. Each points us in a direction that has worked well to handle the recurring challenges of human life. A view of human nature that ignores the power of emotions is sadly short-sighted. Intelligence can come to nothing when the emotions hold sway. But while our emotions have been wise guides in the evolutionary long run, the new realities civilization presents have arisen with such rapidity that the slow march of evolution cannot keep up. The slow, deliberate forces of evolution that have shaped our emotions have done their work over the course of 1,000,000 years. Despite having witnessed the rapid rise of human civilization and the explosion of the human population have left little imprint on our biological templates for emotional life. We have 2 minds, one is the rational mind that thinks and another is the emotional mind that feels. There is a steady gradient in the ratio of rational to emotional control over the mind. The more intense the feeling, the more dominant the emotional mind becomes. In most moments, these minds are exquisitely coordinated. But when passions surge, the balance tips. It is the emotional mind that captures the upper hand, swamping the rational mind. Let's have a look at the working of brain when faced a possible threat. In humans, the amygdala is an almond-shaped cluster of interconnected structures perched above the brainstem, is the specialist for emotional matters and acts like an alarm company. When it sounds an alarm of, say, fear, it sends urgent messages to every major part of the brain, triggers the secretion of the body's fight or flight hormones. A visual signal first goes from the retina to the thalamus, where it is translated into the language of the brain. Most of the message then goes to the visual cortex, where it is analyzed and assessed for meaning and appropriate response. If that response is emotional, a signal goes to the amygdala to activate the emotional centers. But a smaller portion of the original signal goes straight from the thalamus to the amygdala in a quicker transmission, allowing a faster response. Thus, the amygdala can trigger an emotional response before the cortical centers have fully understood what is happening. Part 2. The nature of emotional intelligence. Academic intelligence has little to do with emotional life. People with high IQ can be stunningly poor pilots of their private lives. At best, IQ contributes about 20% to the factors that determine life success, which leaves 80% to other forces. These other forces constitute emotional intelligence. Personal intelligence in the 5 domains defines emotional intelligence. First domain is know thyself. Know thyself speaks of the awareness of one's own feelings as they occur. This is also known as self-awareness. Self-awareness is not an attention that gets carried away by emotions, overreacting and amplifying what is perceived. Rather, it is a neutral mode that maintains self-reflectiveness even amidst turbulent emotions. Self-awareness is fundamental to psychological insight. This is the faculty that much of psychotherapy means to strengthen, as much of emotional life is unconscious. Feelings that stir within us do not always cross the threshold into awareness. Emotions that simmer beneath the threshold of awareness can have a powerful impact on how we perceive and react, even though we have no idea they are at work. But once that reaction is brought into awareness, one can evaluate things anew, decide to shrug off the feelings left earlier in the day, and change his outlook and mood. Now comes the second domain, managing emotions. When emotions are too muted, they create dullness and distance. When out of control, too extreme and persistent, they become pathological, as in immobilizing depression, overwhelming anxiety, raging anger. Indeed, keeping our distressing emotions in check is the key to emotional well-being. Downs as well as ups spice life, but need to be in balance. In the calculus of the heart, it is the ratio of positive to negative emotions that determines the sense of well-being. It is not that people need to avoid unpleasant feelings to feel content, but rather that stormy feelings not go unchecked. People who have strong episodes of anger or depression can still feel a sense of well-being if they have a countervailing set of equally joyous or happy times. Managing our emotions is a full-time job. Everything from reading a novel or watching television to the activities and companions we choose can be a way to make ourselves feel better. The design of the brain means that we very often have little or no control over when we are swept by emotion, nor over what emotion it will be. But we can have some say in how long an emotion will last. Of all the moods that people want to escape, rage seems to be the most intransigent. The longer we ruminate about what has made us angry, the more good reasons and self-justifications for being angry we can invent. Brooding fuels anger's flames. But seeing things differently douses those flames. Reframing a situation more positively is one of the most potent ways to put anger to rest. A universal trigger for anger is the sense of being endangered that can be signaled not just by an outright physical threat but also by a symbolic threat to self-esteem or dignity. Another thing is, anger builds on anger. Here are two main ways of intervening. One way of diffusing anger is to seize on and challenge the thoughts that trigger the surges of anger. The earlier in the anger cycle, the more effective. The second way is cooling off physiologically by waiting out the adrenal surge in a setting where there are not likely to be further triggers for rage. For instance, in an argument, getting away from the other person for the time being. Giving vent to rage is sometimes extolled as a way of handling anger. However, studies show that it does little or nothing to dispel it. There may be some specific conditions under which lashing out in anger does work. Like when it is expressed directly to the person who is its target, when it restores a sense of control or rights an injustice. But actually, ventilating anger is one of the worst ways to cool down. Next comes worry. The worrying mind spins on in an endless loop of low-grade melodrama. Worry is a rehearsal of what might go wrong and how to deal with it. The task of worrying is to come up with positive solutions for life's perils by anticipating dangers before they arise. The difficulty is with chronic, repetitive worries, the kind that recycle on and never get any nearer a positive solution. The basic step that can help is self-awareness, catching the worrisome episodes as near their beginning as possible. Then, monitoring cues for anxiety, identifying situations that trigger worry. Next comes about managing melancholy. People are most inventive when it comes to trying to escape the blues. Of course, not all sadness should be escaped. Melancholy has its benefits. It enforces a kind of reflective retreat from life's busy pursuits, and leaves us in a suspended state to mourn the loss, mull over its meaning, and, finally, make the psychological adjustments and new plans that will allow our lives to continue. Depressed people sometimes justify this kind of rumination by saying they are trying to understand themselves better. In fact, they are priming the feelings of sadness without taking any steps that might actually lift their mood. Two effective strategies for this are: one is to learn to challenge the thoughts at the center of rumination. The other is to purposely schedule pleasant, distracting events that will shift your mood, like an exciting sporting event, a funny movie, an uplifting book. A more constructive approach to mood lifting is engineering a small triumph or easy success, helping others in need. Next domain is the master aptitude. Powerful negative emotions twist attention toward their own preoccupations, interfering with the attempt to focus elsewhere. They overwhelm all other thought, continually sabotaging attempts to pay attention to whatever other task is at hand. On the other hand, consider the role of positive motivation, the marshalling of feelings of enthusiasm, zeal, and confidence in achievement. What seems to set apart those at the very top of competitive pursuits from others of roughly equal ability is the degree to which they can pursue an arduous practice routine for years and years. And that doggedness depends on emotional traits. Another study suggests that the ability to delay gratification contributes powerfully to intellectual potential quite apart from IQ itself. Next comes anxiety. Worry is the nub of anxiety's damaging effect on mental. Emotions out of control impede the intellect. But we can bring out of control emotions back into line. This emotional competence is the master aptitude, facilitating all other kinds of intelligence. This is like using the anxiety to get motivated to prepare well for a challenging situation. Next comes the role of hope and positive attitude. People tend to differ in the general degree to which they have hope in this sense. Some typically think of themselves as able to get out of a jam or find ways to solve problems, while others simply do not see themselves as having the energy, ability, or means to accomplish their goals. From the perspective of emotional intelligence, having hope means that one will not give in to overwhelming anxiety or depression in the face of difficult challenges or setbacks. Indeed, people who are hopeful evidence less depression than others as they are less anxious in general, and have fewer emotional distresses. Being able to enter flow is emotional intelligence at its best. It is a state in which people become utterly absorbed in what they are doing, paying undivided attention to the task, their awareness merged with their actions. They are unconcerned with how they are doing, with thoughts of success or failure. To enter the state of flow, one is to intentionally focus a sharp attention on the task at hand. Once focus starts to lock in, it takes on a force of its own, both offering relief from emotional turbulence and making the task effortless. Just as flow is a prerequisite for mastery in a craft, profession, or art, so too with learning. Students who get into flow as they study do better, quite apart from their potential as measured by achievement tests. Next comes about empathy. Empathy builds on self-awareness. The more open we are to our own emotions, the more skilled we will be in reading feelings. Alexithymics are the people who have no idea what they feel themselves, and are at a complete loss when it comes to knowing what anyone else around them is feeling. This failure to register another's feelings is a major deficit in emotional intelligence, and a tragic failing in what it means to be human. Its lack is seen in criminal psychopaths, rapists, and child molesters. To treat them, the offender goes through a simulated reenactment of the crime, playing the role of the victim. Empathy with the victim shifts perception so that the denial of pain is difficult and so strengthens the men's motivation to fight their perverse sexual urges. Psychologists have found that infants feel sympathetic distress even before they fully realize that they exist apart from other people. Even a few months after birth, infants react to a disturbance in those around them as though it were their own, crying when they see another child's tears. By 1 year or so, they start to realize the misery is not their own but someone else's. While raising a child, there are moments that let the child know her emotions are met with empathy, accepted, and reciprocated. This process is attunement. The countlessly repeated moments of attunement or misattunement between parent and child shape the emotional expectations adults bring to their close relationships. When parents are misattuned to a child, it is deeply upsetting. The child begins to avoid expressing. But there is hope in reparative relationships. An imbalance at one point can be corrected later. It's an ongoing, lifelong process. a study of criminals who committed the cruelest and most violent crimes found that the one characteristic of their early lives that set them apart from other criminals was their life histories that suggest emotional neglect and little opportunity for attunement. Next comes about handling social ties. The fine art of relationships requires the ripeness of two other emotional skills, self-management and empathy. Deficits here lead to ineptness in the social world or repeated interpersonal disasters. One key social competence is how well or poorly people express their own feelings. Emotions are contagious. We catch feelings from one another. We send emotional signals in every encounter, and those signals affect those we are with. The more adroit we are socially, the better we control the signals we send. Emotional intelligence includes managing this exchange. The degree of emotional rapport people feel in an encounter is mirrored by how tightly orchestrated their physical movements are as they talk. The mark of a powerful leader or performer is being able to move an audience of thousands in this way. Similarly, people who are poor at receiving and sending emotions are prone to problems in their relationships. If the test of social skill is the ability to calm distressing emotions in others, then handling someone at the peak of rage is perhaps the ultimate measure of mastery. Now comes the third part of the book, Emotional Intelligence Applied. Let's have a look at the relationship between a husband and his wife. There is a great role of social pressure in keeping a marriage. But if social pressures are no longer the glue that holds a marriage together, then the emotional forces between wife and husband are that much more crucial if their union is to survive. In childhood, parents discuss emotions, with the exception of anger, more with their daughters than their sons. Girls are exposed to more information about emotions than our boys. Though with the sons they go into more detail about the causes and consequences of emotions like anger. As a result, women come into a marriage groomed for the role of emotional manager, while men arrive with much less appreciation of the importance of this task for helping a relationship survive. Consider the implications of this emotional gender gap for how couples handle the grievances and disagreements that any intimate relationship inevitably spawns. An early warning signal that a marriage is in danger is harsh criticism. In a healthy marriage, husband and wife feel free to voice a complaint. But too often in the heat of anger, complaints are expressed in a destructive fashion, as an attack on the spouse's character. These harsh personal criticisms have a far more corrosive emotional impact than do more reasoned complaints. This type of behavior is devastating to the health of a relationship and cuts off all possibility of working out disagreements. The real emotional exchange between a couple having a troubled marriage is shaped by their thoughts. Thoughts of being an innocent victim or of righteous indignation are typical of partners in troubled marriages, continually fueling anger and hurt. Once distressing thoughts become automatic, they are self-confirming. The partner who feels victimized is constantly scanning everything his partner does that might confirm the view that she is victimizing him. These thoughts are powerful. They trip the neural alarm system and cause the emotional hijacking. They get angry, hurt, or otherwise distressed by things their spouses do, and they stay disturbed once the episode begins. This frequent emotional distress is called flooding. People who are flooded cannot hear without distortion or respond with clear-headedness. They find it hard to organize their thinking, and quite often, next step is divorce. In this trajectory toward divorce, the tragic consequences of deficits in emotional competencies are self-evident. Here is the advice for both. For men, the advice is not to sidestep conflict, but to realize that when their wife brings up some grievance or disagreement, she may be doing it as an act of love. Also, men need to guard against offering a practical solution too early on. For women, the advice is quite parallel. Since a major problem for men is that their wives are too intense in voicing complaints, wives need to make a purposeful effort to be careful not to attack their husbands. To complain about what they did, but not criticize them as a person. Couples who eventually divorce lack the attempts to de-escalate the tension. One overall strategy for making a marriage work is not to concentrate on the specific issues like child rearing, sex, money, but rather to cultivate a couple's shared emotional intelligence, thereby improving the chances of working things out. Because flooding is triggered by negative thoughts about the partner, this requires monitoring such thoughts, realizing that one does not have to believe them. This allows to reframe the thought pattern. Another skill that keeps couple together is non-defensive listening. The most powerful form of non-defensive listening is empathy, hearing the feelings behind what is being said. One powerful way to de-escalate a fight is to let your partner know that you can see things from the other perspective, and that this point of view may have validity. Next comes the role of emotional intelligence in professional life. Leadership is not domination, but the art of persuading people to work toward a common goal. And, in terms of managing our own career, there may be nothing more essential than recognizing our deepest feelings about what we do. First factor in creating a difference at workplace is criticism. It is one of the most important tasks the manager has. Yet it's also one of the most dreaded. The effectiveness, satisfaction, and productivity of people at work depend on how they are told about nagging problems. Indeed, how criticisms are given and received goes a long way in determining how satisfied people are with their work, with those they work with, and with those to whom they are responsible and are voiced as personal attacks. A study showed that inept criticism was ahead of mistrust, personality struggles, and disputes over power and pay as a reason for conflict on the job. Too often people criticize only when things boil over. And that's when they give the criticism in the worst way. Such attacks backfire. They are received as an affront, so the recipient becomes angry in return. It's the worst way to motivate someone. Consider the alternative like an artful critique. An artful critique focuses on what a person has done and can do rather than reading a mark of character into a job poorly done. Next factor is considering diversity at workplace. This is basically the biased behavior towards race, caste, etc. Prejudices are a kind of emotional learning that occurs early in life, making these reactions especially hard to eradicate entirely, even in people who as adults feel it is wrong to hold them. Later in life you may want to change your prejudice, but it is far easier to change your intellectual beliefs than your deep feelings. The solution is to adopt zero tolerance for such intolerance. After all, when people come together to work as a group, each brings certain talents. While a group can be no smarter than the sum total of all these specific strengths, it can be much dumber if its internal workings don't allow people to share their talents. Next comes about the role of emotions in health. The immune system is the body's brain. Studies have shown that the nervous system not only connects to the immune system, but is essential for proper immune function. Stress and negative emotions weaken the effectiveness of various immune cells. Like anger reduces the pumping efficiency of heart by 7% or even greater. Being prone to anger is a stronger predictor of dying young than are other risk factors such as smoking, high blood pressure. Each episode of anger adds an additional stress to the heart by increasing his heart rate and blood pressure. When that is repeated over and over again, it can lead to coronary artery disease. Next toxic emotion is anxiety. Distress comes in the face of situations that we must live with or that are conjured by the mind, not real dangers we need to confront. This compromises immune function to the point that it can speed the metastasis of cancer, increasing vulnerability to viral infections, accelerating the onset of diabetes, and worsening or triggering an asthma attack. Evidences are there that the nervous system is subject to wear and tear as a result of stressful experiences. But as chronic emotional distress in its many forms is toxic, the opposite range of emotion can be tonic. Optimism, hope has healing power. People who have a great deal of hopefulness are, understandably, better able to bear up under trying circumstances. Next comes the role of social life in health. Social isolation doubles the chances of sickness or death. Elderly people who suffer heart attacks, but have 2 or more people in their lives they can rely on for emotional support, are more than twice as likely to survive longer than a year after an attack than are those people with no such support. The quality of relationships as well as their sheer number seems key to buffering stress. If this emotional support is brought to medical care, it would be very beneficial. These include helping people better manage their upsetting feelings as a form of disease prevention and by attending the psychological needs of the patients. This will not only improve their recovery, but will also improve their chances of survival after undergoing a surgery. Next comes 4th part of the book, Windows of Opportunity. Family life is our first school for emotional learning. In this intimate cauldron we learn how to feel about ourselves and how others will react to our feelings. How to read and express hopes and fears. This emotional schooling operates not just through the things that parents say and do directly to children, but also in the models they offer for handling their own feelings and those that pass between husband and wife. How parents treat their children has deep and lasting consequences for the child's emotional life. The 3 most common emotionally inept parenting styles proved to be ignoring feelings altogether, being too laissez-faire, being contemptuous, showing no respect for how the child feels. Finally, there are parents who seize the opportunity of a child's upset to act as what amounts to an emotional coach or mentor. They take their child's feelings seriously enough to try to understand exactly what is upsetting them and to help the child find positive ways to soothe their feelings. This has an extraordinarily sweeping impact. Such expect to succeed in life's little challenges. By contrast, babies who come from homes too bleak, chaotic, or neglectful go about the same small task in a way that signals they already expect to fail. The first opportunity for shaping the ingredients of emotional intelligence is in the earliest years. A study on bully character has found its origin in their childhood, when the child was offered violent behavior during his childhood. Next comes the role of trauma. A horrific incident, vivid, terrifying moments, become memories emblazoned in the emotional circuitry, leading to symptoms like sleep disorder. These are basically symptoms of post-trauma stress disorder or PTSD. These symptoms can last even decades. Actually leads to neural changes which make amygdala aroused, making a person more susceptible to further traumatizing. When the amygdala and its connected brain regions take on a new set point during a moment of intense trauma, then life is on the verge of becoming an emergency. Such traumatic memories seem to remain as fixtures in brain function because they interfere with subsequent learning. Ordinarily, when someone learns to be frightened by something through fear conditioning, the fear subsides with time. In PTSD, spontaneous learning fails to occur. But given the right experiences, even PTSD can lift. One study found that people who had more activity in the left frontal cortex got over the acquired fear more quickly. Here are 3 stages for recovery from trauma. The first step, regaining a sense of safety, presumably translates to finding ways to calm the too fearful, too easily triggered emotional circuits enough to allow learning. Another early step is to help patients regain some sense of control over what is happening to them. Another step in healing involves retelling and reconstructing the story of the trauma in the harbor of that safety, allowing the emotional circuitry to acquire a new, more realistic understanding of and response to the traumatic memory and its triggers. Last step is to mourn the loss the trauma brought. It marks the ability to let go of the trauma itself to some degree. Until now, it was about altering our emotional patterns. But what about genetically endowed responses like being highly volatile or painfully shy, which is known as our temperament? The question is whether it can be changed by experience. There are at least 4 temperamental types: timid, bold, upbeat, and melancholy. Each is due to a different pattern of brain activity. The difference between being timid and bold lies in the excitability of a neural circuit centered on the amygdala. People who are prone to fearfulness are born with a neurochemistry that makes this circuit easily aroused, and so they avoid the unfamiliar, shy away from uncertainty, and suffer anxiety. While those who have a nervous system calibrated with a much higher threshold for amygdala arousal are less easily frightened, more naturally outgoing, and eager to explore new places and meet new people. People with more activity in the left frontal lobe are by temperament cheerful. But those with relatively greater activity on the right side are given to negativity and sour moods. Studies found that people who overcome depression have learned to increase the level of activity in their left frontal lobe. The encouraging news is that temperament is not destiny. The overexcitable amygdala can be tamed with the right experiences. What makes the difference are the emotional lessons and responses children learn as they grow. Those parents who engineer gradual emboldening experiences for their children offer them what may be a lifelong corrective to their fearfulness. It appears that mothers who protect their highly reactive infants from frustration and anxiety in the hope of effecting a benevolent outcome seem to exacerbate the infant's uncertainty and produce the opposite effect. Of all species, we humans take the longest for our brains to fully mature. Each area of the brain develops at a different rate. The sensory areas mature during early childhood. This makes childhood a crucial window of opportunity for shaping lifelong emotional propensities. Critical experiences include how dependable and responsive to the child's needs parents are. By the same token, neglect or abuse, or brutal discipline can leave their imprint on the emotional circuitry. Now comes the fifth and the last part of this book, emotional literacy. Based on the current education pattern, we care more about how well school children can read and write than whether they'll be alive next week. Increasing violent incidents, heightening of the turmoil of adolescence show deficiency of emotional literacy. What is at stake is nothing less than the next generation. A more careful look at the mechanics of specific problems suggests how given deficits in emotional or social competencies lay the foundation for grave problems. The bent of mind that aggressive children take with them through life is one that almost ensures they will end up in trouble. When they have difficulties with someone, they immediately see the other person in an antagonistic way, jumping to conclusions about the other person's hostility toward them without trying to think of a peaceful way to settle their differences. But timely help can change this. When emotional training sessions given to such kids, those found less disruptive, had more positive feelings about themselves. A new look at the causes of depression in a young pinpoints deficits in two areas of emotional competence, relationship skills, and a depression-promoting way of interpreting setbacks. That depression should not just be treated, but prevented. Even mild episodes of depression in a child can augur more severe episodes later in life. Another cost to these children is doing poorly in school. The good news is, there is every sign that teaching children more productive ways of looking at their difficulties lowers their risk of depression. One cause of distressing thoughts found in girls that arises due to feeling compelled to compete with unattainably high standards of female beauty leading to eating disorders. Another case is of social outcasts. Two kinds of emotional proclivities lead children to end up as social outcasts. One is the propensity to angry outbursts. The second is being timid, anxious, and socially shy. But over and above this, it is children who tend to be shunted aside. They have trouble reading and responding to emotions and report great anxiety and many worries, as well as being depressed and lonely. However, training such children to hone their ability to read and respond appropriately to other children's feelings has shown success. A self-medication that youth is taking to soothe feelings of anxiety, anger, or depression is alcohol and drugs. One current scientific theory is that those who stay with the habit are becoming increasingly dependent on alcohol or drugs. For people who are biologically predisposed, the first drink or dose of a drug is immensely reinforcing. That is a short-term good feeling in exchange for the steady meltdown of one's life. However, acquiring the ability to handle those feelings removes the impetus to use drugs or alcohol in the first place. It would be far better if they were learned early in life, well before the habit became established. We cannot deny the effect of factors such as poverty, fragmented, abusive, or chaotic family, or in an impoverished, crime and drug-ridden neighborhood. But there is a role that emotional competence plays over and above family and economic forces. Comprehensive training which is related emotional and social competence is also found helpful in protection of children against sexual abuse. For this, some schools have introduced a subject known as self-science. The subject in self-science is feelings, your own and those that erupt in relationships. Students in self-science learn that the point is not to avoid conflict completely, but to resolve disagreement and resentment before it spirals into an out-and-out fight. As family life no longer offers a sure footing in life, schools are left as the one place communities can turn to for correctives to children's deficiencies in emotional and social competence. Emotional literacy implies an expanded mandate for schools, taking up the slack for failing families in socializing children. Now arises the question, whether emotional literacy makes a difference? The answer is yes. There are concrete benefits. The data suggests that as children advance through the curriculum from grade to grade, there are discernible improvements in the tone of a school and level of emotional competence of the girls and boys who take them. If character development is a foundation of democratic societies, emotional intelligence buttresses this foundation. Being able to put aside one's self-centered focus and impulses has social benefits. It opens the way to empathy, to real listening, to taking another person's perspective. So, given the crises we find ourselves and our children facing, and given the quantum of hope held out by courses in emotional literacy, we must ask ourselves, shouldn't we be teaching these most essential skills for life to every child now more than ever? And if not now, when? Here we shall wind up the video. If you like this, hit a like, share it with your friends. Subscribe to this channel for more such videos and hit the bell icon to get notified about the latest updates. Be safe, be happy. Leo Tolstoy said, anyone can become angry, that is easy.